In this tutorial, we are going to see a method for determining a relatively precise value of the acceleration due to gravity, the famous g. At the same time, we will debunk Gary Mosher's law, F equals mv, a relation that does not describe nature, but rather documents the moment when a misread textbook became a grievance against the universe. I'm not kidding. This is really what he thinks Newton's second law is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you're not going to show me an experiment where it doesn't work out that way.
So, we are going to prove him wrong. Of course, everyone knows about the value of 9.80 meters per second square, but where does it come from? It is an acceleration, so we could measure how a falling object accelerates. But this is not easy because acceleration is a change of velocity over time, and velocity itself is a change of position over time. So, what we propose in this tutorial is a very simple experiment that anyone can do at home, and which can easily give an estimate of g with 3 significant figures if done properly. For this, all you need is a thread attached to a dense ball, which together will constitute a pendulum, a ruler to measure the pendulum's length, a stopwatch to measure the period of the oscillations, and a spreadsheet software in order to perform data fitting. Something important to mention is that what we define as the length of the pendulum is the length of the thread plus the ball's radius. In other words, the pendulum's length is the radius of the circular motion followed by the ball's center of mass. Let us start with some theory which we are going to experimentally test. We consider here a pendulum that oscillates and that makes an angle theta with the vertical that remains smaller than 15 degrees. We assume that the mass of the thread is negligible and we call m the ball's mass. As the pendulum oscillates, the ball travels along an arc of length x from the equilibrium position. In order to analyze the ball's motion, we make a free body diagram of it. There are only 2 forces applied to it, its own weight and the tension in the string. For this problem, it is convenient to choose our y-axis parallel to the string, downward in our case, and the x-axis perpendicular to it, pointing away from the equilibrium position. We want to make use of Newton's second law, and for this we need to decompose the weight into x and y components. By using some trivial trigonometry, we find that the x component is equal to negative mg sine theta, while the y component is equal to positive mg cosine theta. It should be clear that the tension and the y component of the weight don't cancel each other, because there must be a centripetal acceleration. However, these 2 forces don't contribute at all to the tangential acceleration. Thus, only the x component of the weight is of interest for determining the pendulum's motion. Now, according to the actual Newton's second law, the net force is equal to the mass times the acceleration. In the x direction, the net force is the x component of the weight, negative mg sine theta, so by dividing by the mass, we find that the acceleration in the x direction is equal to negative g sine theta. But according to Gary Mosher, the net force is equal to the momentum, mv, so according to him, it is the x component of the velocity that is equal to negative g sine theta. So, let us put these 2 equations on the test bench. We use the fact that velocity is, by definition, the time derivative of the position, while acceleration is the second time derivative. Now, if we use radians for the units of angles, the arc length x traveled by the ball is equal to the radius of the circular path L times the angle theta. Substituting these into the 2 different equations, we end up with 2 nonlinear differential equations. A second-order one for real scientists who know that Newton's second law is F net equal ma, and a first-order one for pseudoscientists who believe in Gary Mosher's religion. These two differential equations can be linearized by restricting the angle to small values. In that case, the sine of the angle is just equal to the angle itself, and we end up with two linear differential equations whose solutions are trivial. As a result, intelligent people predict that the pendulum exhibits harmonic oscillations with an angular frequency omega given by the square root of g over L, while Gary Mosher and his cult members believe that the pendulum comes back to equilibrium exponentially fast without oscillating. Let us check that. Sorry, Gary. Again, nature just proved you wrong. Now that we have proved both theoretically and experimentally that the pendulum oscillates, let us determine the expression of the period of oscillations t. All we have to do is to use the fact that the angular frequency is by definition 2 pi over the period. Thus, the period is 2 pi times the square root of L over g. Of course, as opposed to Gary's religion that relies solely on blind belief, our theory can be tested experimentally. Since our formula predicts that the period depends on the square root of the pendulum's length, we conclude that the square of the period must be directly proportional to the length, with a coefficient of proportionality equal to 4 pi square over g. Thus, all we have to do is a series of measurements of the period for different lengths, and if the graph of t squared versus L is a straight line that passes by the origin, then the experimental data will support the theory. In this case, in addition, the slope of the line will be directly related to the value of g. So, here is the procedure. All we have to do is to choose an arbitrary length for the pendulum, measure it by taking care of adding the ball's radius to the thread's length, and then measure the period of the oscillations. And here we have to use common sense. If we try to measure the period as the time for a single oscillation, we will obtain a poor measurement because it is hard to determine when to start the stopwatch and when to stop it, which results in some uncertainties. However, we can easily minimize these uncertainties by measuring the time for 50 oscillations or more, then divide the total time by the number of oscillations. This way, we can obtain very precise measurements of the period. It is also important to keep in mind that the formula we derived is valid only for small oscillations, typically for angles smaller than 15 degrees. Here we can use a maximum angle of only 5 degrees, which makes the approximation excellent. So, here is a table of values for the time of 50 oscillations that we obtained for different lengths. Of course, Gary might claim as usual that the data are made up, but if he does, he will only make a spectacular fool of himself, since there is absolutely nothing that prevents him from doing the experiment. Anyone can do it and check that our results are accurate. Alright, what we want is the period. That is the time of a single oscillation, so let us create a third column for it, and we also want a fourth column with the square of the period. Next, we ask the software to take the values of the second column and divide them by 50. Likewise, we ask the software to take the square of the values of the third column. Now, we want to plot the fourth column as a function of the first one. So, let us make copies of them. And now, we can select them and insert an XY scatter plot. As expected, the data points seem to fall on a straight line, so let us check that by adding a linear trend line. So far so good, but to check that we have the expected directly proportional relationship, we need to check that the line passes by the origin. So let us force the horizontal axis to start at 0. Yes, there are some good signs here of direct proportionality. And to make it obvious, let us ask the software to extrapolate the trend line backwards. Wonderful! The last thing we can do is to ask the software to display the equation of the trend line. And here, the software gives us the slope of the line and the intercept. The thing to notice is that the intercept is completely negligible compared to the slope times the x-coordinate of the data points, which confirms the direct proportionality. As a result, the excellent agreement between the fitted line and the data points proves that the data points are well described by the equation t² equals slope times L, with the slope equal to about 4.032 seconds square per meter. Finally, we can identify the slope of the line with the quantity 4 pi square over g, from which we conclude that g is equal to 4 pi square over the slope. This allows us to conclude that our experimental value of g is 9.79 meters per second square. So, remember we announced an estimate with 3 significant figures, and you might want to argue that our 9.79 value doesn't match with the well-known 9.8 average value. It turns out that the experiment was done in New Orleans, so let us ask Google a question. There you go. Our value matches with the precise value of 9.79317 meters per second square that was measured at the University of New Orleans with a technology far more advanced than a simple pendulum. If you like this video, please give it thumbs up, write a comment, and share it on your social media. Don't forget to subscribe.